Lack of accountability, corruption and fraud in South Africa reigns when the constitutional process has become so utterly dysfunctional. The ravages of corruption casts an ominous dark shadow over the future political, economic and social progress of the country. This cancer defeats efforts to establish a culture of constitutionalism, democracy, respect for the rule of law and good governance. In his book titled Reinforcing Constitutional Values in the Sixth Term, author Abrey Sedupane speaks of corruption as probably one of the biggest threats to stability in South Africa today. He joins us to talk more on his book. Good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight as we speak. I remember there was a time when we would hear in every single press conference, read in every single government statement that South Africa has a good story to tell. And I remember during that time, a lot of people were saying it depends on which side of the fence you are sitting on when it comes to this particular good story to tell. What do you make of South Africa today? Does it have a good story to tell?
Thank you very much, Bongiwe. I would say that certainly there are those particular stories that we can say really they are good to tell the public. But in general, there are a number of things that have gone amiss. Hence, I decided just to pen this particular book termed Reinforcing Constitutional Values in the Sixth Term. I have a subheading which says that we are running out of time. Mm-hmm. This particular subheading is based on the principle at the constitutional provision that whatever that we do, all the constitutional obligations that we need to perform them in a diligent manner and without delay. Mm. So I would say that we have not really arrived at where we ought to be within this 27 years. There's been a significant delay. There hasn't been enough diligence that has been applied on specifically the question of realization of human rights as well as the performance of the constitutional obligations.
And when you look at, Section 237, as you say, of course, it really calls for the performance of all constitutional obligations, as you alluded to there, to be performed without delay. What do you think is behind the delay?
Yeah, I think the delay really emanates and is a corollary of lack of political will. The key thing is that we have really disregarded our constitutional values. I think the challenge as well emanates from the fact that we have turned the Constitution into a document of convenience. Mm. I only use the Constitution when it's convenient for me to use it. But I forget the fact that when I occupy a public office, I have taken this particular conviction, even if I do not take an oath, given my level, let's say for argument's sake, as an employee, if I do not take an oath, but I must have a conviction to serve the public. So that is the particular challenge that we've had. One, lack of political will. Two, this particular lack of political will then becomes a challenge which now results in the employees themselves now not following the particular prescripts as provided for by the Constitution and further any other regulatory framework such as legislation or our bylaws.
When one reads your book, there's something that you talk about which is really critical, and that is professional ethics and integrity that are quite critical to a diligent state. Certainly, the fading of such qualities in leadership could prove detrimental for South Africa.
I agree 100%, Bongiwe, because the principle around the high standard of the ethical public service is provided for in the Constitution. That is why I'm saying that we tend to use the Constitution as a document of convenience. It does not apply to me when I feel that it does not apply to me. So our leadership has to lead by example. It is very painful. That is why when you look at the book, I make an example about the former DG of the Public Service Commission himself, whom I perceive as the number one guardian of the principle of high standard of ethics in our public service. That is one of the people who was found to have disregarded this particular section 195 of the Constitution. So as a leader, as a head of the secretariat, as a technocrat, who should as well be leading by example under administration, is then found wanting when it comes to compliance with this particular principle, then really it is so disappointing. So I agree 100% with you when you say that leadership has to lead by example.
When one looks at the allocation of funds, I mean, you think about communities like the ones, we just spoke to, the residents of Gwahlati, for example, complaining about lack of service delivery. And certainly they're not the only community that is complaining around lack of service delivery. There's also an interesting aspect in your book where you touch on the issue of the spending festival, as you call it, where municipalities and departments are then holding on to monies for around 10 months. But certainly when it's closer to the financial year end, they spend it on everything else but service delivery. Why do you think this continues to be, and why has it not been curbed?
Yep, I think similarly once more, Bongi, where the issue of diligence is very pertinent. Section 237 of the Constitution actually encompasses the manner in which we must do our work. When we plan at the beginning of the year, we plan very well and we say that we need this particular amount of money, which we are looking forward to use towards these particular basic needs of the people. But because of lack of diligence, because of lack of expediency, lack of attaining people's rights with immediacy, we then forget that those particular obligations. We drag our feet. We then wait until the end of the year. Hence, I term it a year-end festival. So the issue once more now lies with the accounting officers to say, are they really diligent? Are they doing exactly what it is that they ought to be doing? Because the question of accountability, the question of use of resources lies mainly with our accounting officers. So these are the people that we need to zoom into and say, do we have the fit and proper persons with a conviction to serve the people in our public service positions?
And how much then of a concern is it that those who are supposed to be playing an oversight role are seemingly not doing so?
Yep, that is again one of our problems, because you will have realized as well that in the book I deal with the question of having an attentive cabinet. Wherein I look as well into ministers, their roles and so forth, to say, are they really diligent as well themselves? Are they really complying with their constitutional requirements, even legislative on that note? But one has really discovered that there hasn't been that particular attention to detail by the ministers themselves, by cabinet in general, the executive, and worst of all by the legislature, who are supposed to be holding the executive accountable. Hence the EFF decision case against the Speaker of the National Assembly. The result of that particular case shows certainly that our parliamentarians do not play the role that they ought to be playing.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Certainly your book makes for interesting reading. That was Abrey Sedupane there, who was just talking to us about his book titled Reinforcing Constitutional Values in the Sixth Term. Coming up